My name is Liam. This story isn't just some eerie tale to scare you. This actually happened to me and my two closest friends, Mike and Anna. It was supposed to be the perfect getaway, a luxurious cruise on the Atlantica, filled with endless entertainment, stunning views, and good company. But what started as a dream quickly turned into a nightmare, one I still can't fully escape. The first day was everything we'd hoped for. We lounged on the sun-soaked deck, sipped cocktails, and soaked in the vibrant energy of the ship. The second night, however, was when everything began to unravel. A grand party was in full swing on the top deck, with neon lights flashing and music pounding through the warm ocean air. People danced, laughed, and drank like there was no tomorrow. Mike, Anna, and I had staked out a corner near the bar, enjoying the atmosphere but preferring to keep a little distance from the wildest of the crowd. That's when I saw her. She was walking through the crowd with a grace that felt out of place. Her movements were fluid, her expression unreadable. Something about her immediately unsettled me, but I couldn't pinpoint why. She was beautiful, no doubt about it, with long dark hair cascading over her shoulders and piercing eyes that seemed to lock onto their target. Her target was Mike. She stopped right in front of him, leaning in close. Her voice was low, but I could still hear her words. "You won't live to see the sunrise." Mike froze. His face went pale, and for a moment, it looked like he couldn't breathe. Then, as quickly as she appeared, the woman melted back into the crowd. Mike turned to us, his voice trembling. "She said I'm going to die tonight." At first, Anna and I tried to laugh it off. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe Mike had heard her wrong. But then I noticed something. "Did you see her neck?" I asked. Anna frowned. "What about it?" "She had a tattoo. A snake, bearing its fangs." Mike's eyes widened. "She did. I saw it, too." We scanned the crowd, trying to find her again, but she was gone. What we did notice, though, sent chills down my spine. Scattered throughout the party, other people had the exact same tattoo on their necks, a snake with its fangs bared. "Liam," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't normal. There's something wrong here." Mike was visibly shaking now. "We need to get help." We decided to report the incident to the captain. The corridors leading to his office were eerily quiet, the sound of the party fading behind us. When we arrived, his office was empty. The lights were on, and papers were scattered across his desk, but there was no sign of him. We found a crew member and tried to explain what had happened, but they brushed us off, claiming the captain was probably attending to other matters. Their indifference only heightened our sense of dread. Mike's panic was escalating. "I can't stay here. We need to call someone, police, the Coast Guard, anyone." I agreed. Whatever was happening, it was beyond anything we could handle alone. We found a phone and managed to contact the local Coast Guard. They promised to send a patrol boat immediately. The wait for the Coast Guard felt endless. We stayed in our cabin, locking the door and huddling together. Every noise outside made us jump. The air felt heavy, like something unseen was pressing down on us. When the Coast Guard finally arrived, they conducted a thorough search of the ship. But their findings left us more confused and terrified than ever. "There's no one here with a snake tattoo," the lead officer said, his tone dismissive. "That's impossible." I snapped. "We saw them. Dozens of them." The officer just shook his head. "Maybe you've been drinking too much. Or maybe the stress of the trip is getting to you." Mike was furious. "We're not making this up. That woman threatened me." The officer didn't respond. He simply gave us a perfunctory nod and left with his team. After they were gone, the ship felt different. The lively energy from earlier was completely gone. It was as if the Atlantica itself was holding its breath. We returned to our cabin, desperate for some sense of normalcy. Mike, trying to lighten the mood, suggested we watch a movie. But as he reached for his bag, he froze. "Guys," he said, his voice barely audible. "Look." On his wrist, faint but unmistakable, was the same snake tattoo. I felt my blood turn to ice. When did that happen?" Mike shook his head, his breathing shallow. "I don't know. I didn't feel anything." Anna grabbed a towel and tried to rub it off, but the tattoo wouldn't budge. It wasn't ink. It was something else. Suddenly, the lights in our cabin flickered. The air grew colder. And then we heard it, a voice, faint but distinct, coming from nowhere and everywhere all at once. "You won't live to see the sunrise." When the sun finally rose, Mike was gone. His belongings were still there, his bed untouched. It was as if he had simply vanished. Anna and I left the ship as soon as it docked. To this day, no one has been able to explain what happened to Mike or the mysterious passengers with the snake tattoos. But sometimes, late at night, I feel a burning sensation on my neck. And when I look in the mirror, I swear I see the faint outline of a snake, its fangs ready to strike. Gleaming hallways, grand staircases, and enough amenities to make it feel like a floating city. But there was a heaviness in the air, a kind of quiet unease that I couldn't shake. The first night went by without incident. We enjoyed the welcome dinner, explored the deck, and marveled at the open sea under the stars. But as we stood near the railings, soaking in the night air, I noticed something strange. At the far end of the deck, a man stood alone. He was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a captain's uniform that looked distinctly old-fashioned. His cap was pulled low, hiding most of his face, but even from a distance, I could feel his eyes on me. "Ivan," I whispered, nudging him. "Do you see that guy over there?" Ivan squinted into the darkness. "What guy?" I turned back, but the man was gone. I brushed it off as my imagination. Maybe I was just tired from the day's travel. But the next evening, things got stranger. We were in the ship's grand lounge, watching a live performance. The atmosphere was lively, and the laughter of other passengers filled the room. But my focus kept drifting. At the far side of the lounge, by the entrance, the same man stood silently, his figure half hidden in the shadows. This time, I was sure it wasn't my imagination. His presence felt heavy and oppressive, like he was drawing the warmth out of the room. I elbowed Clara. "Do you see him?" "By the door." She turned to look, but when I glanced back, he was gone. Again. "James," she said, frowning. "You're acting weird. Are you okay?" I nodded, but I wasn't. Something was wrong with this ship. The third night was when the fear became undeniable. After dinner, we decided to grab drinks at the bar. As we laughed and chatted, I heard it, a faint scraping sound, like heavy boots dragging across metal. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice low. Ivan froze, his eyes darting around. "Yeah, I hear it." Clara rolled her eyes. "You guys are letting this ship's atmosphere get to you." But then we all heard it, louder this time, and unmistakable. The sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, came from the corridor just outside the bar. We rushed out to look, but the hallway was empty. Later that night, back in my cabin, I lay awake, unable to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The small clock on the nightstand ticked steadily, the only sound in the room. And then I heard it again, the footsteps. They started faintly, far off, and grew louder as if someone was pacing the hallway outside my door. My heart raced. I mustered the courage to peek outside, but when I opened the door, the corridor was empty. I closed the door quickly, my breath shaky. But when I turned around, I froze. On the mirror above the dresser, words had appeared, written as if someone had traced them with a finger on a fogged surface. "You are not welcome here." The next morning, I shared what I'd seen with Ivan and Clara. To my shock, Ivan admitted he'd experienced something similar. There was writing on my bathroom mirror, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It said, "Turn back." Clara, though skeptical at first, was starting to feel uneasy. What if this is some elaborate prank? But deep down, we all knew this was no prank. That evening, we decided to confront one of the crew members. When we explained what had been happening, his face went pale. He glanced around nervously before speaking in a hushed tone. "You shouldn't talk about these things," he said. "But if you must know, there's a story. They say Captain Adrian, the ship's first captain, died saving this vessel during a violent storm decades ago. He sacrificed himself to keep it afloat. Some believe his spirit never left the Okeanos." We didn't want to believe him. Ghost stories were for kids, not rational adults. But what happened next made belief irrelevant. The fourth night, the ship's ballroom was hosting a masquerade party. Everyone was dressed in elegant costumes, masks hiding their faces. The mood was lively, but I couldn't shake the growing unease in my chest. As I scanned the room, my stomach dropped. At the edge of the dance floor, standing utterly still, was the captain. His old-fashioned uniform was out of place among the modern attire. His mask, unlike the others, was bone-white, with hollow eyes. I grabbed Clara's arm. "He's here." She followed my gaze, and for the first time, her face registered pure terror. "James, he's looking right at us." Before we could move, the ballroom lights flickered, then went out completely. Screams erupted in the darkness. When the lights came back on, he was gone. But on the polished wooden floor where he had stood, there was a single wet footprint. By now, we were desperate to escape. But with the ship still far from the nearest port, we were trapped. That night, back in my cabin, I heard a voice. Faint at first, like a whisper carried by the wind, but it grew clearer. "You cannot leave." I spun around, searching for the source, but the room was empty. Then I saw the mirror again. This time, the words were written in bold, dripping streaks. "The sea is my grave. It will be yours too." On the final morning, as the ship approached the port, we felt a glimmer of hope. We stood on the deck, watching the shoreline grow closer. But just as relief began to set in, Ivan suddenly screamed. He pointed toward the water. "Look! He's there!" We followed his gaze and saw a shadow beneath the surface of the water, pacing the ship like a predator stalking its prey. And then, just as the ship docked, the shadow vanished. We left the Okeanos and never looked back. But even now, I feel his presence. At night, when the world is quiet, I hear the creak of boots on metal. And sometimes, when I pass by a mirror, I catch a glimpse of his reflection, watching, waiting. My name is Alex, and what I'm about to share isn't a work of fiction. It's not the plot of some ghost story I cooked up to entertain you. This happened. To me. To all of us aboard the Horizon Dawn. The cruise began like any other, a luxury trip across the Atlantic, promising a week of carefree enjoyment. I boarded with my closest friends, Sarah and Matthew, eager to escape the grind of everyday life. The ship was magnificent, its decks gleaming under the sunlight, its staff polished and attentive. The first few nights were blissful. We sipped cocktails on the deck, laughed over card games in the lounge, and watched the endless expanse of ocean stretch into the horizon. The sea was calm, the skies clear. Nothing hinted at the horror waiting for us. It began on the fourth night. We were lounging on the upper deck after dinner, enjoying the cool night air. Matthew leaned against the railing, gazing at the stars. "The sky looks weird tonight," he said, narrowing his eyes. "What do you mean?" I asked, glancing up. Before he could answer, Sarah pointed. "Look! Over there." I followed her finger, and my breath caught. There, in the inky black sky, hung two moons. One was the familiar silvery orb we all knew. But the other, it was smaller, blood-red, and seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat. The sight was mesmerizing yet deeply unsettling. Gasps and murmurs spread among the other passengers. People clustered together, pointing and whispering in hushed, anxious tones. It's probably some kind of optical illusion, Matthew suggested, though his voice wavered. Or maybe a rare celestial event. But deep down, none of us believed that. The unease turned to terror when the ship began to tremble. At first, it was a gentle vibration, barely noticeable. Then it intensified. Plates and glasses rattled in the dining area. Passengers stumbled as the deck shifted beneath their feet. "What the hell is happening?" someone shouted. From the ocean, waves began to rise, not normal waves, but towering, aggressive swells that slammed against the ship with unnatural force. The calm sea we'd enjoyed just hours earlier had transformed into a raging nightmare. Then, from the water's surface, a dense fog began to rise. It wasn't like any fog I'd ever seen before. This was thick, almost tangible, curling around the ship like a living thing. Everyone inside, a crew member yelled, "Now!" But the fog didn't give us a chance. The mist engulfed everything, smothering the deck in a suffocating shroud of gray. I could barely see Sarah or Matthew standing just feet away from me. The air grew icy, and an oppressive silence settled in, broken only by strange whispers. At first, I thought they were coming from the passengers. But the more I listened, the more I realized these weren't voices I recognized. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, guttural and ancient, like the echo of something long forgotten. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Alex, we need to go inside." Her voice was shaky, her nails digging into my skin. We tried to move, but the fog felt like it was pressing against us, slowing us down. Shapes began to form in the mist, shadowy figures that seemed to glide just beyond our reach. Their movements were deliberate, purposeful, as if they were circling us. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the fog lifted. The ocean was calm again, the waves gentle, the air clear. The red moon was gone, leaving only the pale light of the familiar moon overhead. The passengers looked around, dazed and disoriented. Some were crying, others stood frozen, their faces pale. "What just happened?" Matthew asked, his voice barely above a whisper. None of us had an answer. When we made our way back inside, something felt off. The clocks throughout the ship all showed the same time, 9 p.m. The same time we'd noted as we stepped out onto the deck hours earlier. "That's weird," Sarah said, frowning. "Maybe the system reset during the storm?" It wasn't just the clocks. As the night wore on, more oddities became apparent. The date on the ship's itinerary screens hadn't changed. The food served at breakfast was the exact same menu we'd had our first morning aboard. At first, we thought it was a mistake. Maybe the crew had accidentally recycled the itinerary. But when the ship finally returned to port, reality hit us like a freight train. The date wasn't just wrong on the ship. It was wrong everywhere. We had docked exactly 1 day after we departed, despite spending what felt like a week at sea. Passengers demanded answers, but the crew was as baffled as we were. Some people suggested a massive hallucination or a shared psychological event triggered by something in the water or air. But deep down, we all knew that explanation didn't fit. There were whispers among the passengers, rumors of what had really happened. Some said we had sailed into a time pocket, a phenomenon where the normal flow of time ceases to exist. Others claimed we'd passed through a dark twin, a shadow version of our world where time and space twisted in unnatural ways. And then there were those who believed the fog wasn't just fog. That it was alive, sentient, and had somehow taken us. I didn't want to believe any of it. But the nightmares started almost immediately after we returned home. Every night, I dream of the red moon, its pulsing glow burning into my eyes. I hear the whispers, closer now, as if they're just outside my bedroom window. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I see something moving behind me, something that isn't there when I turn around. I don't know what happened that night on the Horizon Dawn. I don't know where we went, or what followed us back. But I do know one thing, We were never meant to see what we saw. And whatever it was, it's not done with us yet.